person asked for a quick tip on tonality and how to balance tones in a painting. And this person goes ahead to say a color can be described in terms of hue, intensity, and temperature. Where does tone stand with respect to these aspects of color? We'll give some clarity to that one. Well, our British friends use the term tone to mean the same thing that we use the term value for. It all means lights and darks. So when you're talking about the tones of color, you're talking about the range from the darkest darks to the lightest lights. Now, I speak the language of values, so I might not use the word tone all the way through. And I can't give you a full demonstration as to how to balance tones, but I can give you some necessary clues to get you started. First of all, in order to understand or to know values, you need to learn how to read the inherent hues of value. And the best way to do that is simply start with a value scale like this and a color wheel. Any color wheel would do. If you don't have a color wheel, you can go to our site at dianemize.com, click in the menu under free stuff, and you can find a color wheel that you can print and use that. This is a nice little value scale for being able to read the values of color. I do have value scales on the free site too. You could print out the value scale, punch holes in the little blocks of value, and use it much the same way as you can use this one. In the US, this one is readily available. So either way, as long as you have some guide, we need these guides in the beginning in order to understand or to comprehend how things work. So if I am looking at this value scale and I'm trying to understand what is the inherent value of these colors, some of them are obvious. Yellow is the lightest value, the yellow hue is the lightest value of all the hues. Blue is the darkest value of all the hues. Now some people will argue that purple is. Let's don't get in an argument about that. Let's just say of the primaries that blue is the darkest. Well, how are you going to know the inherent value of all of these as they appear on the color wheel? One way you can do this, and this is also a good way to identify the values of any color you're looking at. If I take this little thing, you can look right through this little hole, and I hold it right there and squint, you can tell that that yellow is really, really, really light. If I put it on this value, I can tell that the yellow is not necessarily the lightest light there is, not as light as white, but almost. So I can tell that that value is really light. Now, it really gets difficult for a lot of people when they get to the colors as they move around towards orange and red. So I can hold, I can start anywhere in the value scale. For example, if I hold the value scale here on orange and squint, I can see it's lighter than that value. Squint again, and you squint and you just hold that squint for a while. And that it's almost that range. If I squint there, what I'm looking for is they're visually sort of blending together as light and dark. And so if I squint really at that one, I can see the orange or yellow orange. All right, it's darker than that one, and this ends up, if you were going to code 1 to 10 on the value scale, where 1 is the lightest light, this ends up about 3. And I can continue to move around, and I see the next one's a little darker. So then I can move it up a little bit, and you can see then by moving around the color wheel like this, it will help you to identify the value range of the inherent value. And when I say inherent, I mean the value of this color in its purest form. Now we know that the yellows, all these colors have ranges from the lightest light, in case of yellow would be its lightest version, to the darkest dark. But if you learn to read what you see on the color wheel first, that does help. Now, understanding the inherent values of colors will help you then to be able to read the values of the colors that you're looking at in any scene, in landscape, inside, portrait, animals, it doesn't matter what. The next thing is to learn to read or learn to discern shadow values. Now this one gives a lot of people trouble. A lot of people don't quite get how to read shadows in values. Well, let's put some examples up here and show you how we can do that. Now I have here a photo of a kitten. Let me just move that. Now one thing you can do is what I've done right here. You can squint. The squinting is your best friend, especially when working with values. Also a good friend when you're working with colors, but especially working with values. When you squint and also to the point that all those details go away and all you can see is differences in values, then that enables you to better identify the values. So we can see here, if I squint here till it becomes blurry in my eyes, almost to the point of this, then I can see how it falls into values. And that enables me to read it better. And I can hold this thing in front of me. I'll turn it towards you. But if I close one eye and squint the other one down, and I hold this in front of me, and I move it from, I focus on a single area. Say if I'm focusing right here, for example. Just play with me here. Hang in there. I can move it and focus, put this one first of all on this area, right here. Squint and compare. And which is darker? The value that I'm reading right here or this? If this is darker, then, or if this is lighter, it should match right in, well, it wouldn't, right, this is gray. So if this is lighter, then I would move it on this way, to this one, right here. And I keep moving it until I find a value that matches this value right here. Now when I'm reading shadow values, I'm reading values that are darker than values that are not in shadow. So right in here, we're reading shadow values. And how will we know if they're shadow values? One way you can find out, if you have a 10 value scale like this, values that are falling on this side of that value scale are most likely shadow values. That's a good way to read them. Then that shows you that you don't have just one color of shadow, or one value of shadow, but you have several. And in some cases you're going to have as many as 5 values in the shadow areas. Now let's take this one down and let's look at another one. Okay. How are you going to know what the shadow values are in this? Most people will look at something like this and all they see is a waterfall here, and they see water back there and water back here and snow on, you see snow here and you see snow here and you see snow here and you see clouds here, and you don't know what to do with it. Switch that language and learn to see shadows. Now the reason I'm saying learn to see shadows is because that's where your darks are. And the question was about the tones, balancing the tones. So the thing to do again, if you can't see it, if you can't recognize, this is shadow right here. This is not shadow. Light's shining on this, but this is shadow. If you'll notice, these, the lighter portions of the shadow are lighter than the darker portions, which might seem obvious, but it's a good way to discern or be able to teach yourself to recognize shadows. So if I do this now, if I take, let's just start someplace that is obvious. This is not in shadow. And how do I know it's not in shadow? Well, it registers, one way I can find out, it registers right in this level on this side of the value scale. That's, if you're numbering 1 as the lightest light, that would be somewhere between 1 and 5. And then as I come on over, I would find that most of what's in light, well, let's see, what about in the clouds, for example, right in here. We can see that if you squint, most of what's in light is going to be register on this side of the value scale. Now let's look right here. The difference between this and this. If we turn it right here, then we begin to see. This is even a little darker than this is. This gets closer in value. And yet that is white water in shadow. So if you'll use these little techniques to help you recognize the difference between what's in shadow and what's not in shadow, that's going to help you to understand the values or the tones that are in the things that whatever you're looking at. So recognizing this and the ability to read values, read first of all the general area. If you can read the shadow values, then you know you're in a value range there. If you can read the values not in shadow, then you're on the other side. You're in that lighter value range. So that's your first step. Then the next step, and this is about the balance. Now the whole principle of balance has whole lots of stuff into it. So let's don't go there, but just remember this, that when you're painting, no matter what is here, you decide to have at least an uneven percentage of light to dark. If you have a 50% amount of light or a 50% and a 50% amount of dark, it feels ambiguous. It doesn't read right to the viewer, something uncomfortable. So even though there might be 50-50 here, you as the artist switch that around and pull in just enough stuff into your painting, say in the dark area, so that you would have at least 60% dark, means 60% that falls in the shadow areas, or 70%. You could have 70-30. That's a good balance. So 70% of one, 30% of the other, and it could be in either way. It could be 70% light, 30% dark, or 30% dark and 70% light. Either way works. Now that is all I'm going to tell you about the balancing part, because the most important thing is to first of all learn to discern the values of hues. You're going to see the world in hues unless you're colorblind. You're going to see the world in variations of hues. So being able to read those and see them rather than try to be intellectual about it, but learn to see them and to know when you're looking at them what values you're looking at. That's your first step. Your second step is to learn to discern the values that you find in shadows and the values you find in areas not in shadow, or we also would say in light. And then differentiate, or learn to differentiate the value ranges, that you have a variety of values, at least 5, in the shadow areas, and you're going to have at least 5 values in the areas not in shadow. I said at least, meaning you might not have them all, but you have that potential. And then, of course, the next thing is to, when you're trying to balance the amount, try to balance it anything other than 50-50. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com, where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.